We have with us the Executive Director for the African Center for Parliamentary Affairs, Dr. Rashid Rahman. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
And you're here to speak to us about what transpired in Parliament. That'll be Friday.
Yes.
Okay. And we know that you had an interaction with Mama Yusuf Abuaje and your views were well known. But take us through what really happened and the Speaker, ultimately, the decision by the Speaker to go through with the motion ultimately.
Yeah, I think simply what happened, at least, was what we all saw. There were some behind the scenes, maybe events that we didn't get a chance to see. You know, the sitting was suspended at some point when tensions were high, and normally that is, I mean, what is done in parliamentary practice. When tensions are high, I mean, sittings are usually suspended, and then the leaders would get the opportunity to try and see whether they could resolve tensed matters. The Speaker allowed the motion. He allowed the person who was if you like, the carrier or the mover of the motion, Honorable Muntaka Mubarak, to make his case. He also allowed other processes to go through, such as somebody to second the motion and so on. We saw an attempt by the majority to scuttle the motion, if you like, by making a very strong argument that there were procedural issues related to the motion in terms of some signatures and so on and so forth. But I think at the end of it all, the Speaker read the mood of the nation and decided that he would rather let the motion proceed despite those minor challenges. And in the end, we saw the Speaker ruling that a committee be set up, and the committee has been given a mandate and a timeline within which it has to deliver on the task that has been assigned to it. So I think
now, once a committee has been put together,
yes,
what processes will the committee go through in, let's say, investigating what they have to, as directed by the Speaker?
Yes, I think the first act, usually when a special ad hoc committee is set up by Parliament, is for the members to meet and then maybe decide the ground rules in terms of how they are going to undertake their task and so on. If it's a very big committee, sometimes you have maybe subcommittees set up to look at different aspects and so on and so forth. I don't know whether the committee has met yet because it's today Monday. So I believe maybe during the course of this week, the committee might start its work. And then I don't know whether its work is going to be public in terms of the hearings and the witnesses that appear before the committee, because they would have the power to summon people, to summon documents, to ask people to show up to answer questions and so on and so forth. In some instances, depending on the level of, national interests on such matters, the proceedings in some countries are made public. But in most instances, they will sit in camera and admit witnesses and collect information that they need to collect in order to help them to come up with their report.
So it means that at the end of the day, there will be taking witnesses from outside the jurisdiction or the parameters of Parliament.
If you say jurisdictions, outside, what do you mean? You mean non-parliamentarians?
Basically.
Yes. Because this concerns the Ministry of Trade, and it also concerns the business community. So I am sure that they are going to be talking to the people from the ministry, maybe including the minister, chief director, and so on. And then they will also be talking to the business community. But my doubt is I am not too sure whether we are going to have the business community speak up, because, I mean, you know how it works. I mean, we have the government being the biggest business partner to most of these private sector businesses. So I wonder if we are going to have a situation where these business people who will be invited to the committee speak up. But, you know, the the challenge is that once you show up before a parliamentary committee, you swear under oath, and if you say anything that is not true, that can come back to haunt you. So maybe they might be guided by that, and also perhaps if it's in camera, we might have a lot of people speaking up.
Now, what is the practice perhaps on the continent, or even within what the president has been, and then also in the best of the democratic jurisdictions we have around the world in trying to investigate such matters? Is it always taken up by Parliament?
Yes, it's mostly taken up by Parliament. In fact, we just completed a research funded by the British Academy. It was an academic research, and we looked at we were doing this in partnership with some of our partners, I mean, university in Canada. We looked at the role of Parliament in curbing corruption in about 7 or 8 countries, and majority of them are on the continent. We looked at Nigeria, Ghana, Tanzania, and Uganda. It's very interesting. In the East African countries of Tanzania and Uganda, in the very recent past, they've had many instances where such committees were set up to investigate matters that, if you like, alleged scandals that were attributed to some ministers of state and ministries and so on. And it's very interesting also that in those countries, both Uganda and Tanzania, we saw a number of ministers lose their positions, either pushed out or resigning on the back of the investigations carried out by Parliament.
Either because either they were indicted or not.
Exactly. I mean, maybe those who perhaps resigned even ahead of the investigations and so on, I think they were doing that on the basis of the kind of maybe moral compulsion and so on. What we haven't seen in our country, and particularly in West Africa generally, is this kind of situation where ministers would go on the back of, I mean, moral issues or on the back of some investigation being carried out. So you see, while we applaud the decision that Mr. Speaker took, if you like, even against the majority, and we all know Mr. Speaker, despite the fact that he sits as an impartial arbiter and so on, I mean, we know where his sympathies lie because of the fact that at least he has held a seat in the name of MPP before. I mean, that is not to say that, I mean, he works, he's supposed to work.
You mean we know naturally his political leanings?
Exactly, we know
before his independent work as a speaker.
Exactly. And in the work of every Speaker of Parliament, what you need to do at all times is to endear yourself to the entire House, particularly to the minority group, because the minority group is always very quick to have a perception of unfairness and so on and so forth. Mr. Speaker ruled, if you like, it was a good day for the minority and it was a good day for oversight in this country. But what we are waiting to see is maybe what comes out of that investigation and the work of that committee.
We know what happens in the more developed democracies, but even on the back of your citing of Uganda and Tanzania, how can we strengthen our own and the processes that we use in investigating some of these actions that are permitted by the Speaker of Ghana's Parliament or even the Parliament of Ghana?
You know, Roland, one of the things that is very disturbing in our country is the excessive partisanship that we see play out in 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 Parliament, outside of Parliament, and in everything that is our politics in this country. You know, in countries where we see some of these things happening, to the extent that, I mean, ministers lose their positions, I mean, Parliament uses its power to censure or to impeach to the letter and so on, you see unity amongst parliamentarians that, look, on this matter, this is a national issue, this is an issue that is of public interest and so on, and we have to act as such and not side with any parochial party, personal interest and so on. In this country, I think we are yet to get there. We are yet to get there. I mean, based on my observations of the work of our parliament and so on. I hope this time we do. I hope this time we do, and hopefully that will set a very good precedent. Because you see, there are systemic issues. I mean, I've said this before. I mean, in my last conversations with your colleague, that sometimes, I mean, hinder, you know, the efforts of any particular MP or a committee to, I mean, discharge their oversight functions effectively. I mean, we have the constitutional arrangement. Your colleague ministers are sitting in Parliament. We have a situation where a majority of MPs are maybe aspiring to be ministers of state and so on. We've had instances where both the majority, I mean, current majority leader, previous majority leaders have spoken against the arrangement that we have, which hinders the work of Parliament, particularly the oversight functions of Parliament, because you wear two hats. And I think in most cases, what we see is that members of Parliament who are ministers of state, I think their allegiance, even in terms of work and so on, is more, I think, towards the executive than towards Parliament. In the dying days of the third sitting, we saw Mr. Speaker lamenting every day about absenteeism. And the majority of those who were absent were ministers of state. They were doing ministerial job, which means I think that is preferred to showing up in Parliament and so on. So all these things, and then in addition we have the situation where you and I don't know how our political parties are funded. I mean, there's no transparency in that. We don't know how MPs get resources to run their campaigns and so on. All these come together
to pose a challenge.
To pose a challenge to the efforts of oversight. And then, you know, you cited advanced countries. In those jurisdictions, I mean, what we see is that people go to Parliament in most instances to make a career as legislators. And they go to Parliament to truly represent their people. And before they go to Parliament, I think they have a cause that they are championing. In our case, sometimes, you know, maybe you ask people, why are you going to Parliament? And it would be interesting. I mean, maybe you should take your microphones there and try and check and see whether people really have a cause that they are pursuing, or just simply a political calling, a number of people gathering and saying, oh, you make a very good MP, so go and run for MP. You are very popular, go and run for MP, and so on. People go there, they make a career as legislators. And because of that, they are driven by that passion to be excellent members of parliament, to be remembered for a number of things that they have championed. And also, I think the other thing is that in those, countries, sometimes members of parliament are allowed to bring what is called the private members bill. So the person will take up an issue of public interest and then push a legislation through and then get it into law and so on and so forth. We haven't had that in this country. I mean, the Right Honorable Speaker in his maiden address to Parliament has indicated that this is one of the things that he wants to champion, because there's nothing really, if you interpret the rules very well, there's nothing really that prevents members of Parliament from doing this. But over the years, we've seen our Parliament try to interpret the rules to give itself, less powers than it is supposed to have.
We'll see how that goes. So we have a 5-member committee, and you trust that the committee will do what it has to do necessarily to come out with a good outcome?
Well, it's a committee of parliament, and before it even starts its work, we don't have to pass judgment.
Right.
But we are hoping that at the end of it all, I think they are reading the mood of the nation, that these people are becoming more and more interested in the work of parliament. People are becoming more and more politically wise. People are becoming more and more interested in using their votes and so on. So you don't go with the people, there might be consequences. Maybe the consequences might not be immediate, but there could be consequences.
Well, thank you very much. Dr. Rashid
Yeah,
Draman has been having a great discussion with us as to how the processes of Parliament work and the Committee of Parliament also work. And we know that the Speaker had given the go-ahead for that investigation by a Committee of Parliament into a motion that was raised by the Minority Chief Whip, Mutanka Mubarak, who is a member of Parliament for Asawase. And we hope that those outcomes also will follow through as a news media house, and we'll give you the latest update on all that. Thanks for joining me, Dr. Draman.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah. We have to go to the press center where Mamavi Osabwaje is having an interaction with a number of personalities, and we're having an assessment of not only the Fourth Republic, but also we're looking at the 1 year period of the Akufo-Addo-led administration having been in office, and that assessment of the government of Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo.